It was a quiet house in South Florida, the kind of neighborhood where nothing unusual ever happened. Inside, a teenage boy sat at his computer typing lines of code in the glow of a dim screen. He didn't think he was hurting anyone. He was just testing, exploring. Then, suddenly, the flashing lights outside, the knock on the door. The FBI had arrived. Jonathan James, barely 16, had just hacked into NASA. To understand who this boy really was, we need to go back, long before the headlines, before the raid, before the name Comrade meant anything.
Jonathan's story begins with his family. His father was a hard-working man, quiet but firm. His mother was caring, devoted, and hopeful for her son's future. When they married, they wanted an ordinary life, a home, stability, a child to raise with love and opportunity. In December of 1983, that child arrived. They named him Jonathan Joseph James. From an early age, Jonathan showed signs of something different, a mind that moved fast, always searching for answers. While other kids played outside, he'd often take things apart just to see how they worked. Radios, old electronics, even family gadgets. Nothing was safe from his curiosity. At school, Jonathan stood out for his intelligence. Teachers saw a boy who was sharp, restless, and often distracted by thoughts beyond the classroom walls. His grades were good when he cared, but his real focus wasn't on school books. It was on something far more powerful: computers. When his family bought their first computer, everything changed. He was instantly drawn in. He spent hours learning how it worked, not just using it, but mastering it. What started as curiosity quickly grew into obsession. His father began to notice the late nights, the dim light under the door, the sound of keys long after everyone had gone to sleep.
Jonathan wasn't social in the traditional sense. The online world became his escape, his universe. There, he wasn't just a kid from South Florida. He was a creator, an explorer, someone who could go anywhere. He began learning about networks, systems, and vulnerabilities. To him, hacking wasn't crime. It was curiosity in motion. His first experiments were small. He'd test security systems, peek into places he wasn't supposed to see. Each success pulled him deeper. The thrill of discovery became addictive. Soon, he wasn't just exploring. He was breaking into real systems, crossing invisible lines that most people never dared to approach. His first targets weren't governments or corporations. They were small, local networks, the ones he could reach easily. Late in 1999, Jonathan's curiosity led him to experiment with real systems for the first time. He slipped into the Miami-Dade School District's computer network, exploring student records and grading systems. It wasn't about destruction, it was about seeing if he could do it. But that act crossed a line. It was no longer innocent exploration, it was illegal entry. Once inside, the excitement consumed him. He began to see the world as a network of open doors waiting to be tested. Before long, his ambition grew, and he started reaching farther into telecommunication systems like BellSouth, experimenting with how corporate and government networks communicated with one another. Each success fed the next, and with each step, his confidence and risk grew. Eventually, his curiosity carried him into territory far beyond what any teenager should have reached, a server belonging to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, part of the U.S. Department of Defense. Jonathan managed to install a backdoor on the agency's system, giving him access to thousands of internal emails, passwords, and classified network data. It was a quiet infiltration, one that went unnoticed for weeks. To Jonathan, it was proof that he could outsmart the most secure institutions in the world. To the U.S. government, it was a serious breach of national security. But even that wasn't the end. Sometime later, Jonathan found another challenge, one that would make him infamous. Using his computer from his family's home, he penetrated networks at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. There, he accessed proprietary software that controlled environmental systems aboard the International Space Station, code worth over $1 million. He didn't alter or damage it, he simply downloaded it, as if it were a souvenir from a digital mountain he had just climbed. But this time, the act could not be ignored. NASA shut down part of its systems for 3 weeks to investigate and repair the breach, costing the agency tens of thousands of dollars. The FBI, NASA's Security Division, and the Department of Defense began tracking the mysterious hacker known as Comrade C0. Eventually, the trail led back to a single home in South Florida. In January 2000, armed agents arrived at Jonathan's door. For a 16-year-old boy, it must have felt surreal to see the consequences of his curiosity manifest as flashing lights and federal warrants. Jonathan was arrested, his equipment seized, and his story instantly became national news. Months later, he pleaded guilty as a juvenile, admitting to the intrusions into NASA and the DTRA. The court sentenced him to house arrest, probation until age 18, and banned him from using computers for anything beyond schoolwork. He was also required to write letters of apology to the agencies he had hacked. For most teenagers, that would have been the end. A harsh lesson, but a chance to start over. Yet Jonathan's life after sentencing was anything but simple. The label of the NASA hacker followed him everywhere. Even when he stayed out of trouble, he remained a person of interest to investigators, a name that law enforcement never quite forgot. In the years that followed, Jonathan tried to live a normal life. Friends described him as quiet, intelligent, and often frustrated, a brilliant mind trapped in a world that only saw him as a criminal. But his past kept echoing. By 2007, the U.S. was investigating a massive retail data breach, a case involving stolen credit card information from companies like TJX, OfficeMax, and others. During that investigation, agents searched Jonathan's home once again, suspecting he might be connected. Jonathan insisted he had nothing to do with it. But he felt the pressure building, the fear that, because of his history, no one would ever believe his innocence. On May 18, 2008, Jonathan James was found dead in his home from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In the note he left behind, he wrote that he felt trapped, certain that he would be blamed for crimes he didn't commit. "I honestly had nothing to do with TJX," he wrote. "I don't believe in our justice system anymore." He was only 24 years old. Jonathan James's legacy lives on as both a caution and a question. How should we treat those whose brilliance leads them to break rules, not out of malice, but out of wonder? Jonathan's life reminds us that genius and destruction can sometimes come from the same spark, and that the difference between them often depends on the guidance and understanding we give them.